The fire that consumed her home had been a silent, terrifying inferno, a ghost ship of flame that left nothing but ash and the searing memory of loss. Now thousands of light years away, nestled in a nebula's cold violet embrace, Eliana felt the familiar, crushing weight of that past. She had fled war, watched her kin shatter, and carried the last ember of her ancient lineage across the gulf between stars. But even here, in a sanctuary meant for peace, the grinding gears of galactic conflict had finally tracked her down. She was the final piece the enemy needed to silence the Elven legacy forever. And the hunters were already knocking at the nebula's door. Eliana, High Warden of the fading Elven line, knelt on the observation deck of the Ethelgerd, her repurposed heavy scout ship. The deck was plated with the ancient, polished silver of her home world, stark against the raw, functional gray of the starship's human-made components. She wore armor woven from star silk and reinforced with molecular plating, but today, she felt as brittle as glass. Beside her, a small scaled head nudged her hand. Ignis, her oldest companion, was a sunstone dragon, not a myth of old Earth, but a creature bioengineered by the first Elven fleets to navigate hostile atmospheres. Ignis was the size of a large dog, his scales shimmering with the warm, shifting hues of a dying star. His sibling Silas, a midnight drake whose scales absorbed ambient light, rested coiled around the primary navigational console, his presence a silent comfort to the ship's meager crew of 4 loyal elves. Eliana gently stroked Ignis's head. "They found us, little son. The Draken-class dreadnought is 2 system jumps away, tracking our energy trail." The scout ship's comms officer, Heir, a young elf with sharp, worried eyes, confirmed her fears. "Warden, sensors show multiple smaller craft detached from the main hull. They're probing the nebula's perimeter. We can't jump again. The engine core needs at least 6 hours to cycle down the quantum flux overload from the last evasion." Eliana rose, the familiar knot of dread tightening in her chest. She had spent 2 cycles running. Now the Elven way evasion, isolation, preservation had run its course. It was time for a desperate final stand. "Heir, initiate the last-ditch protocol. Set the Ethelgerd on a collision course with the Rift sector," she commanded. Her voice surprisingly steady. The Rift sector was a notorious pocket of space-time instability, a graveyard for ships caught in its unpredictable gravity shifts. It was also, rumor had it, the home of a forgotten human outpost. Eliana knew the risks, but the alternative was capture, and she would not allow the bloodline to fall into the hands of the Giatari Hegemony, the cold, metallic empire that had swallowed half the galaxy. "Warden, we're not equipped for that kind of turbulence. We'll be torn apart," Heir protested. "It is our only chance to buy time. They will not risk their dreadnought in the Rift. They will send smaller pursuit craft," Eliana countered, moving swiftly to the armory. "Prepare the drones for launch. Focus on defense. Ignis, Silas, prepare for deployment. We may have to board and fight." Ignis let out a low, challenging growl, the sound resonating through his scaled throat, vibrating with anticipation. He was eager for a fight, bred for it. As the Ethelgerd plunged toward the churning chaos of the Rift, the proximity alarm screamed. A rapid-fire volley of plasma bolts slammed into the scout ship's depleted shields. The Ethelgerd shuddered violently, and Eliana stumbled, catching herself against a console. "Shields at 40%. Heir shouted over the din. Eliana looked at the holographic tactical display. 3 Giatari interceptors were closing fast. They were sleek, dagger-like ships designed to execute surgical captures. The Hegemony didn't want the Elven bloodline dead. They wanted it alive, broken, and displayed. "This is it," Eliana whispered, strapping on her helmet. She looked out at the churning, violet-black storm of the Rift, knowing she was betting her entire civilization's future on a legend about the humans. They were said to be brutal, chaotic, and short-lived. but also fiercely protective of their own. Masters of adaptation, and possessing a legendary, almost mythical stubbornness in the face of impossible odds, the Ethelgerd hit the rift's edge with a deafening screech of stressed metal. The gravitational forces inside the ship became a dizzying, nauseating roller coaster. Systems flickered and died. "We have lost all primary life support. Switching to emergency reserve." Thaler yelled. Eliana gripped her pulse rifle, its weight a comforting anchor. She glanced at Ignis and Silas, who were bracing themselves, their claws digging into the deck plating. If the humans were truly here, if the legends of their fierce survival were true, she would need to find them quickly. Her strength, her magic, and her dragons would not be enough against the Hegemony's endless ships. She needed an alliance, suddenly. The targeting system blinked violently, displaying a massive, archaic energy signature dead ahead, a signature unlike anything the Hegemony or the elves had ever produced. "Warden, something is there. It's huge!" Thaler screamed, just as an explosive pulse of raw gravitational energy ripped through the Ethelgerd's weakened hull. The ship twisted. Alarms went silent, and darkness enveloped Eliana. The last thing she saw was the red light of an emergency beacon, blinking against the blackness of the rift, and the faint, haunting silhouette of a monstrous, static-shrouded structure, a vessel unlike any she had encountered in her long life. She was flung against a reinforced wall, the impact knocking the air from her lungs. Ignis gave a cry of distress as the gravity plating failed completely. Sending them tumbling into the utter, silent void of a dead ship, she drifted, cold and alone, knowing only that she had landed, not in sanctuary, but perhaps in a whole new kind of cage. The silence was the worst part. It wasn't the calm, meditative quiet of the elven temples. It was the suffocating, heavy silence of a tomb. Eliana came to slowly, the smell of ozone and burnt insulation sharp in her nostrils. Her left arm was throbbing, but her life support systems were still functioning. A muffled hiss, the only sound against the dead silence of the Ethelgerd's wreckage. She struggled against the ruined bulkhead. Ignis's anxious, chirping breaths close to her ear. Silas, the midnight drake, was a dark, unmoving coil near the command chair. Eliana reached out, a flicker of fear crossing her heart. He was alive, thankfully, merely stunned. The crash had been catastrophic, but the ship's main core had shielded her small company from the worst of the radiation spike. Thaler and the other two elves were gone, evaporated by the localized gravitational anomaly. Eliana detached her helmet and took a shaky breath of the stale, recycled air. The ship had broken apart in the rift, split clean through the middle. She was in the forward section, which had somehow stabilized in the gravitational field of a massive derelict structure. "Report, Ignis," she whispered, her voice husky. Ignis, still shaken, extended his sensor filaments, a biofeedback mechanism elves had given his line. "No immediate threats, Warden. Low-level energy signatures detected, but not Hegemony. Ancient ... rough. Human-made," the dragon's mental projection echoed faintly in her mind. Eliana moved to the hull breach, a jagged, smoking tear in the metal. Beyond it was the colossal hulk of the structure that had saved them or captured them. It was a space station, but one built with a brutalist, pragmatic aesthetic, exposed conduits, reinforced shielding, and weapon emplacements the size of her entire shuttle. It looked like a castle forged in a star furnace, not the sleek, elegant designs of her own people. She saw crude markings painted on the exterior, a stylized blue globe, and the initials UEA. "Humans," she muttered. She had to find out if they were allies, prisoners, or the mythical warriors the legends claimed. She used her personal energy matrix to stabilize the ship's remaining hatch. Ignoring the pain in her arm, she armed her pulse rifle and secured Ignis and Silas onto her shoulder plates, a tight fit, but necessary. They were her eyes and ears in the dark, She emerged onto the station's hull, and the sheer scale of the human structure dwarfed her. The gravity here was harsh, nearly twice what her physiology preferred. She adjusted her suit's compensators, but the effort was immediate and draining. She found an access lock and cut her way inside. The air was breathable, smelling strongly of burnt lubricants and stale coffee. The interior was a maze of thick cables, blinking warning lights, and abandoned terminals. There were no bodies, but the signs of a struggle were everywhere. Scorch marks, spent human caliber shell casings, and strange viscous black alien blood splattered on the bulkheads. The humans, it seemed, had been fighting a different war. Following the trail of fighting, Eliana entered what must have been the command center. It was chaos, but one terminal was still weakly glowing. As she approached, a holographic map of the local sector sputtered to life. It displayed the J-Turi dreadnought's trajectory. It was still approaching, cautious of the rift, but determined. The Hegemony was coming for her. She heard a faint sound, a rhythmic, metallic thudding, deep within the station's structure. It wasn't a Hegemony patrol. It was too uneven, too human. Eliana turned, Ignis raising his hackles on her shoulder. The thudding grew louder, accompanied by the distinct sound of a heavy tool impacting metal. She followed the sound down a winding corridor that led toward the station's main reactor core. She rounded a corner and stopped dead. Standing there was a human woman. She was small, covered in grime and sweat, wearing patched-up utility fatigues. She had a practical buzz-cut hairstyle and a fierce, unsettling intensity in her dark eyes. She was welding a massive rent in a reactor conduit with a crude but powerful industrial cutter. She didn't look up, too focused on the task of keeping the station from tearing itself apart. Eliana took a step forward. The floor creaked. The human woman stopped instantly, dropping her welding tool. She didn't turn around. She didn't flinch. She simply whispered one word into the absolute silence of the core chamber. Finally. Then, with an impossible speed that shocked Eliana, the human spun, leveling a heavy, pump-action combat shotgun at Alina's chest. The weapon was scarred and ancient, but its intent was crystal clear. "You're not one of them," the human stated, her voice gravelly and low. "But you're not one of us either. You're that prize the Hegemony's been chasing, aren't you?" Eliana froze, her pulse rifle lowered, sensing the raw, contained danger of this solitary fighter. "How do you know my name?" The human didn't lower the gun. "Because I'm the only one left on this rock, and I've been monitoring the chatter for 2 days, waiting for your little distress signal to get through the rift static. I'm Brooke. I'm the only thing between you and that tin can fleet out there. And right now I need to know, are you the key to their defeat, or just a very pretty, very expensive distraction?" The shotgun remained steady. The silence between the two species, the elven remnant and the human sentinel, stretched taut, threatening to break under the pressure of the Hegemony's inevitable arrival. Eliana lowered her pulse rifle slowly, the movement deliberate and non-threatening. Her 2 dragons remained perched and ready. Their eyes narrowed at the glinting barrel of the human shotgun. "I am the key to their defeat," Eliana stated, her elven voice resonant even in the thick air of the reactor core. "My DNA holds the command codes for the last functional sector of the old galactic defense network, the one that even the Hegemony has not been able to crack. They want to force those codes from me. I was running to find an ally, and the legend spoke of humans, of your unbreakable will." Brooke's expression didn't change, but the faintest flicker of recognition or maybe pride crossed her intense eyes. She slowly, cautiously lowered the shotgun. It was a calculated risk, but Eliana noticed the human didn't put the weapon down. She held it at the ready. "The legends were kind," Brooke scoffed, pushing a strand of sweat-soaked hair from her face. "We don't do alliances out here, Elven. We do survival. But you just bought yourself a few minutes." The Hegemony dreadnought is 2 hours out, and it's launching its final wave of boarders now. They know you're here. We have to buy you time to transmit those codes. Eliana watched the human move, already shifting back to the ruptured conduit with a wrench. There was no theatricality, no grand pronouncements, just immediate, pragmatic focus on the task at hand. This was the legendary human efficiency, facing a galactic empire's pursuit craft and prioritizing a leaky pipe. "What is this place?" Eliana asked, moving to help. "The UEA Citadel," Brooke replied, her voice strained as she tightened a valve. "An old, derelict human defense satellite. We were supposed to be the final bastion protecting the Sol system. The Hegemony wiped out the crew months ago. I was the core mechanic. I hid. Now I fix." She paused, finally meeting Alina's gaze. "Those codes, if they're real, they're our last chance. Not just yours. Ours." Eliana nodded, understanding the scope of the sacrifice this human was making. "My ship's forward comms array is mostly intact. If we link it to your station's primary dish, I can begin the upload. But the Hegemony will jam the frequency the moment they enter the rift's bubble. Then we make sure they don't enter the bubble," Brooke said simply. She dropped the wrench and picked up the shotgun. "This station still has power to its main cannons. The system is old, analog and slow, but it's a deterrent. I need you to get to the main comms tower. Ignis and Silas stay here with me. We're running point defense." Eliana hesitated. To leave her 2 dragons, her oldest friends and last protectors, was a deep-seated fear. Brooke saw the hesitation. "They're fast. They're fire. They're what I need to cover the blind spots and buy you 40 minutes. The Hegemony's boarding craft are designed for human targets. They won't expect a pair of fire-breathing nightmares. Trust me, Elven. Trust my stubbornness." The word stubbornness struck Eliana, the central trait in the human legends. She made the choice in an instant. "Ignis, Silas, protect the human," she commanded in their native tongue. "Do not let the Hegemony breach this core." Ignis roared once, a sound of molten promise, and Silas uncoiled, his dark body slinking into the shadows, a specter of silent threat. Eliana raced through the derelict station, her heart pounding with a mix of terror and exhilarating hope. The alliance was fragile, based only on mutual desperation and a shared enemy. But the simple, unyielding resolve of Brooke was a weapon stronger than any plasma cannon. She reached the comms tower. It was a massive, sparking console surrounded by broken glass. She quickly spliced the Ethelgerd's comms cable into the human terminal. The screen flickered to life. Eliana began the transfer, inputting the complex biological keys required to awaken the defense network. The process was agonizingly slow. Outside, the station trembled as the first Hegemony boarding craft began their attack. She could hear the distinct sound of human-caliber rounds impacting metal, followed by the terrifying, echoing roar of Ignis's fire. The human was fighting, and her dragons were fighting alongside her. Eliana worked frantically, her mind blocking out the sounds of battle. She needed 5 more minutes. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the tower. The lights died, and the emergency red lights bathed the room in a bloody glow. A single jagged metal spike, a piece of shrapnel from a breach, had slammed into the comms panel, severing the cable. The transfer stopped at 99%. Eliana scrambled to reconnect the cable, her fingers slick with sweat. Too late. The door to the comms tower melted inward under the force of a Hegemony thermal lance. 2 Jitari soldiers, cold 4-limbed metallic creatures, stepped into the room. They leveled their capture nets. Eliana raised her pulse rifle. But the blast had damaged its power cell. Just as the Jitari soldiers advanced. A roar echoed over the comms speaker she had just been working on. It was Brooke, her voice breathless but utterly determined. "Elven, get to the airlock. The Citadel is locked on final sequence." It's been rigged since the fall. Now go, Eliana understood. Brooke wasn't just fighting. She was initiating the station's self-destruct, colossal gravitational detonation designed to collapse the rift's entrance and take the Hegemony's fleet with it. Brooke and the dragons were sacrificing themselves to give Eliana the final second she needed. Eliana slammed the damaged cable onto the console. The connection sparked, then the screen flashed. Transfer complete. She turned and sprinted toward the escape airlock, the Hegemony soldiers in desperate pursuit. She plunged through the lock just as the air filled with the deafening final roar of the midnight drake, Silas, his dark shadow engulfing the JTARI soldiers. The airlock sealed, and Eliana was ejected into the cold vacuum of space. Watching the Citadel, the last remnant of an unnamed human's desperate courage, implode in a blinding, silent explosion of light. The rift collapsed, taking the Hegemony dreadnought with it. Eliana was alone, the elven codes safely sent. She wept, not for her own survival, but for the brave human and her 2 loyal dragons. Then, from the static-filled space where the Citadel once was, 2 faint, scaled shadows detached and streaked toward her escape pod. They were scorched, exhausted, but alive. Brooke, using the confusion of the blast, had launched them seconds before detonation. The elven codes had activated the defense network. A wave of ancient, human-built sentinels now moved through the black, clearing a path for the lone escape pod. Eliana realized the true strength of humanity, not in their ships, but in their spirit of sacrificial courage. She and her dragons were saved, not by magic or power, but by the relentless, stubborn, and profoundly good heart of a single human mechanic. The time for running was over. The time for the Alliance had begun. This is only the beginning of Alina's new journey. Subscribe now to join the fight for the stars.